name is Crystal O'Connor, and I'm the Archaeological Field Research Manager here at Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. So today, right now, we're in our lab, which is located just downslope from the main house. We're going to go out to the site here in just a little bit, but first I'd like to introduce what it is that we're going to talk about today. So today we're going to be talking about the Site 6 archaeological site. Site 6 is an archaeological site about a half-mile downslope from the main house. We've been here for the past 9 summers, and we've dug 152 5-foot by 5-foot test squares. We found thousands of artifacts. We know based on artifact distributions that this site has 3 cabins or quarters in which enslaved field laborers would have lived and worked in the nearby agricultural fields. They would have been farming wheat during this time. We know based on the artifact concentrations that there are 3 discrete areas or cabins or quarters. We have a cabin in the north, there's a cabin in the south, and there's one in the southeast of the site. We have a lot more spatial coverage of the northern and southern cabins, so I'm going to talk about them mostly, and I'll talk about them first, and then we'll talk about what we're finding in the southeast cabin and how that fits into the site itself. So you're joining us today at Site 6. We're currently standing on what was the working farm, or the plantation. I'm joined today by my colleagues Craig Kelly, Sarah Corquette, Cameron Waddell, and our intern, Macy Clarkley. So this site was occupied from about 1790 till a little after Jefferson's death in about 1826. The way that we found this site is a result of one of our ongoing research programs here in the department called Plantation Survey. This is an effort that started in 1997. Each winter, we go out onto the property and try to do archaeological survey on the acreage that the Thomas Jefferson Foundation owns. So it's about half of the original 5,000 acres. So we go out with a piece of surveying equipment called a total station, and we shoot in a shovel test pit. What a shovel test pit is, it's a hole about 1 foot in diameter. We dig about 1 foot down till we reach sterile subsoil. In this case, it's a bright red clay in this part of Virginia. Subsoil has not been interacted with or affected by human occupation or interaction. So we screen all of our dirt, and we take anything we find, including artifacts from whatever site we may come across, back to our lab. So we traverse across the landscape in this manner, and we kind of are digging along a grid. So we dig at 40-foot intervals. Anytime we find artifacts, we shrink the interval down to 20 feet. And in this case, back in 1997, we came across Site 6. So the shovel test pit survey indicated that we had 3 artifact concentrations. And further research since 1997 has confirmed those 3 concentrations. Cabins during this time would have been pretty ephemeral on the landscape. So cabins down on the working farm wouldn't have had foundations. Jefferson recorded that it took 3 enslaved laborers 6 days to build a cabin. And so this is a pretty quick amount of time. These cabins didn't have any architectural foundations. The bottom sill was put right on top of the ground. So we can't find these cabins architecturally, but we can find evidence of them archaeologically. For the past 9 summers, we've been out here at Site 6 investigating the 3 concentrations further. So these concentrations show us where cabins were located. We find evidence of ceramics, nails, bottle glass, window glass, personal items such as beads, buttons, buckles. When we return during the summer, we excavate in larger 5-foot test squares. So these are 5-foot by 5-foot squares. We excavate each layer as we come across them horizontally, and then proceed through the test square vertically as well.
I'm kneeling in quadrant 150. This is a standard test square that we have at Site 6, and we put this square where it is to investigate this berm that runs behind you there and then further along the way. And we encountered several different layers that sort of tell us the story about what happened in this specific spot. So the first layer goes from where this ground surface is here right down to about where my trowel is. And this is what we call the incipient A horizon, which is a fancy way of saying that this is the forest floor as the forest exists around us. This soil has stayed here long enough that as rain falls, it's forming in place, and little particles are starting to percolate back down lower through the ground as rain is falling through. And this is forming on top of this big red layer that's got lots of clay and then these big rocks. This is colluvium. And colluvium is sediment that has moved down the slope by gravity. It's eroded out of the hill above us here. And as this was plowed, this was an active field at some point, that erosion from this being an open space, all those smaller particles, those silts and clays, came down and accumulated against these rocks. And we have more rocks just along the other side of that square over there. Collected this material against the landscape and built up the berm that you can see today. This has some artifacts in it, and what's really neat is this is the plow zone. We call that plow zone. This would have been where all the artifacts that accumulated here while people were living here at Site 6 would have fallen on the ground, and then once their houses go away and this becomes a field, all those artifacts and any kind of layers that would have been here get churned up by this being plowed over and over while this is cultivated. So what we end up with is, instead of having any kind of little layers that would have told us about different things that happened at Site 6 and little spaces, we get one big, what we call homogeneous layer of artifacts. This is where a lot of artifacts came out of this square. And then the last thing that we have here is what I'm kneeling on, and this is subsoil. Subsoil is really clayey. It's as far down as we need to go in any spot to capture all of the human experience in that one specific space. Once we hit this layer, anywhere where we are, whether it's a couple inches or several feet, we know that we have everything that's happened in that one spot.
The quad's right behind me, and we have this laid out in the context levels that we dug them in. The levels we take out are horizontal layers across most of the quad, usually. And we do that in a way so we can compare them against each other and then also against quads in the site as well. We're going to start over on this end. These came from our B layer. This would have been our A horizon. So this is still kind of soil that's accumulating. It's a stable surface, and so this is just kind of what's collecting, maybe what's been washed down, but it hasn't really been disturbed too much. We're finding nails. We have wrought and machine cut. Wrought nails could have been made here at Monticello. We do have a small cut nail, which could have been made here as well. And then small pieces of brick daub. We call that brick daub because we're not sure if it's actually from a full brick, kind of like this, or if it was just clay that would have been pushed in between the logs of a cabin to kind of help insulate it. Next, we have this colluvium layer. Craig mentioned it before. It was a really gummy clay layer. And it was nice red clay. This preserved our artifacts pretty well. We have nails over here, again, machine and wrought. We're also starting to pick up a little bit of ceramics. They're very small. We have transfer print, pearlware, and some pieces of creamware. And again, more of this brick daub. In the same kind of colluvium layer, we did find one button, which was kind of neat. It wasn't decorated or anything, but it's still nice to find personal items down here. We're not finding too much personal items in the southeast corner, but we're also finding these larger brick bats in a bit of the end of the colluvium layer. So it could have been people pushing bricks out of the field, getting them out of the way before they were plowing, just so you wouldn't mess up your plow. Under that, we have our plow zone layers. We are finding more ceramic pieces. We're finding some wine bottle glass. But an interesting thing about the artifacts that are a bit lower in this quad, in this plow zone layer, are they're really not well preserved. You can see the nails here. We like to call them Cheetoed nails because they just look like a little Cheeto. Really rusty and corroded away. And so all of these would have been artifacts that were on the surface when this site was abandoned. And once those plows came through, it kind of mixed everything up. And even though they are still mixed up, we're still able to tell a lot about maybe who was living here, what kind of materials they would have been investing money in, and also a little more about their lifestyle.
Monticello's had a Department of Archaeology since 1979, and since then we've been committed to discovering and interpreting Monticello's archaeological record, protecting it, and then deciphering its meaning through comparative analysis. Thomas Jefferson, along with his family, lived on the property, along with hundreds of enslaved men, women, and children. Oftentimes, the written record has gaps in it, and we don't know much about the daily lives of the enslaved people that lived and worked here. But in order to tell their stories, archaeology is crucial to getting this message out. It's only through archaeology that we can really have a more complete story of slavery here at Monticello. And as such, the Department of Archaeology is committed to interpreting and learning more about slavery here at Monticello. As archaeologists, we're always interested in how assemblages compare with one another. So here at Site 6, we're interested in comparing the 3 cabins or quarters on this site. So a quarter is just another word for a cabin. Quarter can also function on a larger scale. It can also mean farm or plantation, but in this case, quarter means cabin. Different things within the assemblages that we have found here between the north cabin and the south cabin, things like ceramics and nails help us date a site. And so we look to those artifacts to help us investigate when sites were occupied. These maps show variation in artifact density for ceramics on the left and nails on the right. Blue here is low density and yellow is high density. The maps agree on the locations of the 3 high density areas, and these areas represent 3 cabins. We have good spatial coverage for the north and south and are working hard to increase the coverage for the southeast. The southern cabin has evidence of more creamware. So creamware is a type of ceramic that was produced between 1760 and about 1820. On this image, brighter yellow shows there is much more pearlware in the north and much more creamware in the south. And so when we find these 2 types of artifacts in close proximity, we say, well, maybe the southern cabin was occupied before the northern cabin, since it has more creamware. So we looked for another independent artifact class that would help confirm the temporal occupation of these sites. In this case, we looked to nails. Wrought nails are earlier than cut nails. If the southern cabin was occupied earlier than the northern cabin, we would expect to see a lot more wrought nails in the southern cabin. And when we compare the ratio of wrought to cut nails, we see that in fact the ratio is nearly identical. So that makes us think that the cabins were occupied in fact at the same time. How do we explain the difference between the stark nature of artifacts, between the creamware and the pearlware? We can look to other artifact classes, in this case, American stoneware. American stoneware is a type of vessel that would have been used for Tupperware for storage. And in fact, we have the most American stoneware in that northern cabin, which leads us to believe that people living in the northern cabin, they were staying on the landscape for multiple years. Perhaps they had a garden to gather vegetables from. During this time, it's very likely that people in the northern cabin would have been going out onto the plantation and finding ways to supplement their diets. So from the northern cabin, and not the southern cabin, we have gunflint, we have lead shot. This is an interesting confirmation that folks in the northern cabin could have been providing their own sustenance to supplement their rations that Jefferson was allotting. We also know that people in the northern cabin had way more buttons than people in the southern cabin. Buttons during this time were kind of a flashy way of showing off. And so in the northern cabin, we have almost 50 buttons, and in the southern cabin, we have far fewer. I think there's less than 10 in the southern cabin. In the northern cabin, we've also recovered artifacts such as jaw harps, which are a musical instrument, furniture tacks, which indicate that there is furniture in the cabin. We have found things like beads. We have 3 beads from the northern cabin. We've found buckles. We've found horse hardware, things like bridle bits and stirrup parts. A lot of people have asked us over the years if, because of this rich artifact assemblage, if this is a place where a white workman or an overseer may have been living. And we don't think that's the case. Jefferson didn't record the location of these cabins or who was living in these cabins on any document or any map or any plat. However, he did record the location of overseers during this time period. And Edmund Bacon's quarter is located about 3/4 or a mile east of here. So we know where he's living. We've done some testing archaeologically of that site. And we also have his site location on a map.
So everything from this square, like all of our squares, is excavated by hand. We're using larger shovels, something that you would easily get at Home Depot or Lowe's, but a lot of the times we're using this, and this is called a trowel. Straight edge, and that's how we get our profiles as sharp as they are. And we're really just coming through very carefully because we want to dig horizontally, because if I was to dig in one corner and go really deep versus very shallow on one side, I might go through all these different layers and not capture all of the artifacts in one layer at a time. Because if I mix these layers up, I lose my story. So once this material is taken out as specific layers, so like this would have been A and probably B, those letters get assigned to what we call contexts. That soil or sediment is taken out specifically, goes into a bucket, and those buckets get handed to people like Cameron right here, who's dumping it into a screen, and that sediment is screened, and they're looking for artifacts as they go through, checking rocks to see if they're modified, looking for nails, anything that might be there. And then once those are bagged, it's bagged with a very specific label that says, okay, it's come from the 150th square that we've dug here at Site 6. That letter tells them exactly what layer in that square it comes out of. And then it goes up to the lab where we clean the artifacts and process them, and then they get handed off to some of our wonderful analysts in the lab, and they're cataloging and researching things that we find here in the field.
We have our artifacts laid out on this table to kind of show how we've taken them out. We have our first layers that we excavated going down all the way to our last. Usually when you're on an archaeological site, the stuff that you take out first is going to be the youngest stuff. Sometimes it's, modern band-aids or modern glass that you can find. And then once you go down through the layers, you get to your older stuff. For us here at Site 6, it's a little different. We're in what we call a plow zone. So a lot of the artifacts are getting churned up and we're losing that temporal measurement. But we still separate our context based on sediment type, whether it's clayey, a little more loamy, colors that we encounter, and then also inclusions. One of the artifacts that we found here that was really kind of neat was this celt. It's prehistoric, and it was kind of used as a hand axe. It would have been attached to wood probably over here, and it could have been used for cutting wood. We don't find a lot of Native American artifacts at the site. We're on a mountain. We're not by a really reliable water source. And so they would have been a little closer, a little downslope from where we are. But we do find evidence that they could have been in this area.
When we do find artifacts, all of the artifact information, including measurements and weights and ceramic wares and types of nails, goes into our DAX online database. And you can go online and check out sites that we've cataloged into there previously. And DAX is robust enough that we have over 80 sites representative of the Atlantic world. And you can compare Site 6 with other contemporary sites, other earlier sites, later sites in the database. So we have over 41,000 artifacts at this site, and probably one of the coolest artifacts is a coin. It's a 1-cent piece that we found from that northern cabin. And a lot of people ask us the question, where are these folks who are living here getting all of these ceramics and all of these really cool artifacts? And a lot of people think that Jefferson is in fact the one providing his enslaved labor force with these objects. But we know in fact that that's not the case. This coin is a good indication that people in the northern cabin had their own independent economies. We know that enslaved laborers during this time are growing and then selling things like chickens and eggs and produce from their gardens to the main house. And we know from the accounts of Jefferson's granddaughter while he was president, enslaved laborers are in fact selling those items to the main house, and they're being given money in return. Jefferson's wife Martha also recorded various transactions between the main house and the enslaved workforce. So the coin, again, being in the northern cabin, lets us know that these folks had some sort of independent economy. So another independent line of evidence that we've used to test to see about folks in the northern cabin perhaps having their own independent economy and having more of a permanent presence on the landscape, is by looking at artifact size. So if you think of cleaning your kitchen, when you sweep your kitchen, sometimes you leave small bits behind after the broom has swept, and all the large bits kind of go around the perimeter. And this would have been the same case that ethnoarchaeologists have observed for for foragers in Australia. So folks have gone to study these people and have seen that for maintained yard spaces, large artifacts, in fact, are on the perimeter of the yard, and smaller artifacts are in the middle of the yard. So when we do artifact size indices for these cabins, we see and we suspect that there's yard maintenance going on in the northern cabin and not in the southern cabin. So this is another independent line of evidence that we think people in the northern cabin are, in fact, more permanently tied to the landscape. So this summer and into the fall, the field crew has been working at a third artifact cluster. So this is the Southeastern Cabin. And we're exploring the area, the boundaries and the middle of the artifact cluster to see how this cabin and the artifact assemblage fits into the story of Site 6. And right now, the way that it seems is it's kind of falling between the two cabins as far as artifacts go.
Within this plow zone, we find a lot of the domestic artifacts that make us think that there is a house somewhere probably around me. Little bits of plates, bowls, all sorts of different styles of ceramics. We're finding a lot of nails in this spot, which is indicative that there's a structure here. And they're all nails that date from the late 18th to early 19th century. Wrought nails, which are completely handmade out of nail rod, and then you've got, as nail-making technology improves, they come up with cut nails, where you have a longer plate that then gets cut into these triangular shapes. The biggest piece that's also here, along with the nails and stuff, is brick. We're finding lots of big brick higher up, and we think that the brick is being carried into this upper layer of colluvium by people who are also moving these rocks out of their fields. So big pieces of brick are higher up because they're in the way. When somebody hits them with a plow, it knocks the plow out of the way, just like these boulders are. But down here we're finding lots of smaller pieces of material, and that's not only because they were discarded when they were broken, but they're constantly being plowed through, so they're breaking up into smaller and smaller pieces.
So this kind of complicates the story. It complicates maybe the simplicity that we had originally set ourselves up to kind of envision how people are living down here. But it's actually really exciting and really cool to fill out the narrative of Site 6 and the enslaved community. We do know that Site 6, because of its dates of occupation, is kind of in the second phase of Monticello. So what I mean by that is Jefferson initially set up Monticello to be a tobacco plantation. So this was carrying over from his father Peter Jefferson's plantation management strategies. So when Jefferson assumed ownership, when he moved to Monticello in the late 1760s, it continued as a tobacco plantation. So this site was not occupied during that time. However, people that moved to Site 6 moved from the tobacco plantation to what would become a wheat plantation. And Jefferson switched his plantation management strategy from tobacco to wheat. So one thing that our department is continuing to do is to figure out how Site 6 is representative of the larger Atlantic economy and how it's kind of responding to events going on in Europe at the time, and how Jefferson is moving people across the landscape in an effort to be a part of that economic system. So right here we have artifacts from the 3 artifact concentrations on these tables. So this table over here has artifacts from the northern cabin, and there's more artifacts over there. These artifacts are from the southern cabin, and these artifacts are from the southeastern cabin. And if you look carefully, you can kind of see some differences between the artifacts. As archaeologists, we like to be able to compare assemblages. So artifacts in isolation don't really mean much, but once we start comparing within sites and across plantations and within the East Coast and the Atlantic world, you start to get a more interesting and comprehensive story. So in the northern cabin, we talked about this a little bit before, but we have a lot more personal items. So there's a lot more copper alloy buttons in the north. We have some really nice, stylish pearlware. This is called pinwheel pattern. There's a lot of other personal items like lead shot. So this was used to hunt small game. We have furniture tacks. This would have been in furniture like presses or trunks. We have some pieces of buckles. We have part of a folding knife over there. So again, a lot of evidence of independent economies. This is also where we have the jaw harps and the coin, the slate pencil. The southern cabin, you can see their ceramics are a lot plainer. This is undecorated creamware. We have wine bottle glass. We do have a piece of Native American pottery, nails and brick. And then the square that Craig and Sarah talked about earlier, of course, we still have those artifacts out on the table. And we do have some fancier pieces of pearlware. We also do have some creamware too. So again, further research into the Southeastern Cabin will help us understand how it fits into the community that lived here at Site 6. And that's what we've been working on, and we're going to continue working on for the next month or two before we close up here for the season. So let's review what we've learned from Site 6. So folks in the northern cabin had greater assurance that they were going to be living at that spot from year to year and from field season to field season. And so they were, since they were more permanent, they decided to invest in a garden, and this garden would have allowed access to cash, which would have allowed investment in objects like beads and buttons and buckles and American stoneware storage vessels to store that produce over the winter. Folks in the southern two cabins, we don't think perhaps were as permanently tied to the landscape and might have been moved from plantation to plantation or quarter to quarter from year to year. We don't have as much evidence of stoneware, for instance, and there's not a lot of size sorting going on, so we don't think that folks in the southern two cabins were maintaining yards in the same way that their northern counterparts were. We think that more frequent movement focused on those southern two cabins was because of the switch from tobacco to wheat and the demands of diversified agriculture. And if that's the case, then the switch from tobacco to wheat created greater social inequality among enslaved field laborers. Thanks for tuning in today. We were really excited to tell the story of Site 6 and share it with you. You can continue to follow us on social media as we explore other sites on the property. We're not positive where we're going to head next, but one exciting opportunity would be to explore some of the sites over at Tufton that we've identified through plantation survey. It would be really great to be able to situate Site 6 within the greater plantation, and comparing contemporary sites at Tufton with Site 6 would really help fill out the story of the enslaved labor force here at Monticello.